In the late 19th century, some naturalists proposed the existence of a lost continent. They named it Lemuria. The idea emerged as an attempt to explain certain similarities between species found in India and Madagascar. At the time, continental drift had not yet been understood, and so a land bridge was imagined. A continent long vanished beneath the sea. Over time, this scientific theory faded, but the name Lemuria remained. It began to shift from history into legend. Writers and mystics reimagined Lemuria as an ancient civilization, peaceful, advanced, deeply connected to the natural world. In these accounts, Lemuria was not described as a place of conflict. Instead, it was remembered as balanced, harmonious, and calm. Whether scientific theory or symbolic myth, the image of Lemuria, a continent resting somewhere in the distant past, as scientific understanding progressed, the theory of Lemuria lost its geological foundation. The discovery of plate tectonics provided a new explanation for continental movement. With this shift, Lemuria moved from scientific hypothesis into cultural imagination. Writers of the late 19th and early 20th century began to describe Lemuria as an ancient civilization. In these interpretations, Lemuria was portrayed as vast and peaceful, a continent located somewhere in the Indian Ocean long before recorded history. It was said to have flourished in a distant age, thousands or even millions of years ago. Unlike stories of conquest, these accounts described a society guided by balance, harmony with nature, was central to its existence. The people of Lemuria lived without war. Their culture, according to legend, developed slowly and peacefully. Though unsupported by modern science, the myth endured. It persisted quietly, carried forward through literature and oral tradition. Descriptions of Lemuria often begin with its landscape. Writers imagined a vast continent stretching across warm equatorial waters. The climate was described as mild and stable, neither harsh nor extreme, but steady and accommodating to life. Forests were said to cover much of the land, dense with trees rising quietly toward open skies. Rivers moved slowly through broad valleys. They were not violent or unpredictable, but steady, reliable, and calm. Along the coasts, the ocean remained present, not as a threat, but as a boundary, defining the edges of the continent. Mountains were described as gradual rather than sharp. They rose gently, as if shaped over time, without disturbance. The natural world of Lemuria was not chaotic. It operated in balance, without sudden change. Such imagery reflected the values projected onto the myth: stability, continuity, calm progression. Accounts of Lemuria did not focus solely on geography. They also described a society believed to have developed there. According to later interpretations, the inhabitants of Lemuria lived in small, organized communities. These settlements were said to be structured without hierarchy or conflict. There are no surviving records, no artifacts, and no confirmed archaeological evidence. What remains are descriptions written centuries later. In those descriptions, Lemurian society was portrayed as cooperative rather than competitive. Daily life was imagined as an advanced place and calm. Work work was described as integrated into routine. Tasks were completed without urgency and without accumulation. These narratives suggest a culture guided by balance. Decisions were said to be made with attention to long-term stability rather than immediate gain. The absence of conflict became a defining feature of the Lemurian myth. Whether symbolic or aspirational, this detail appears consistently across retellings. In "'Tis Why", Lemuria came to represent an imagined equilibrium, a civilization remembered not for conquest, but for quiet continuity. Descriptions of daily life in Lemuria emphasize rhythm. Accounts suggest that time was measured not by urgency, but by natural cycles. The rising and setting of the sun, structured activity, work, rest, and reflection were said to follow predictable patterns. Unlike industrial societies, there is no mention of rapid expansion or accelerated production. The pace was imagined as steady and consistent. Agriculture, where described, was integrated gently into the surrounding environment. Land was used, but not exhausted. Food production, construction, and education were portrayed as cooperative efforts. In these narratives, knowledge was shared openly. There is little reference to competition or accumulation of power. Evenings were described as quiet and communal. Communities gathered without spectacle, in simple continuity. This repetition of balance is a defining characteristic of the Lemurian myth. It presents a model of society without volatility. In many accounts, Lemuria did not end abruptly. Its disappearance was described as gradual. In many accounts, Lemuria did not end abruptly. Its disappearance was described as gradual. Some versions propose that the landmass began to sink beneath rising waters, not in a single moment, but in stage. Communities were said to have adapted quietly, relocating gradually, without recorded upheaval. In these narratives, the ocean reclaimed the land without violence. The transition was portrayed as inevitable rather than tragic. Over generations, the continent diminished until eventually it existed only in memory. Although unsupported by geological evidence, the legend of Lemuria persisted. It continued to appear in literature, philosophy, and speculative history. In the early 20th century, various esoteric traditions adopted the name Lemuria. They expanded the narrative, adding symbolic interpretations. In these reinterpretations, Lemuria represented a primordial stage of humanity, an earlier cycle preceding modern civilization. The myth evolved into a reflection of perceived lost harmony, a reminder of balance, thought to have faded over time. Whether considered metaphor or alternative history, Lemuria became a cultural symbol. Its meaning shifted, but its presence endured. The absence of physical evidence did not prevent its continued influence. Ideas often persist independently of verification. For some, Lemuria represents a hypothetical continent. For others, it functions as allegory, a conceptual landscape rather than a geographic one. In either interpretation, the emphasis remains consistent. Across its many interpretations, the image of Lemuria remains consistent, a quiet land defined by stability. Descriptions rarely emphasize conflict. Instead, they focus on equilibrium. a society imagined as steady and composed. The landscape, as portrayed in writing, is expansive, open coastlines, gradual mountains, unhurried rivers. There is little reference to dramatic events. The tone of the legend is restrained. This calm quality might explain its continued appeal. It offers a contrast to narratives of upheaval. Rather than destruction. Lemuria represents slow transformation, change unfolding over extended time. In this sense, the myth functions less as history and more as reflection. It presents an imagined world in which balance remains uninterrupted. When examined closely, the legend of Lemuria reveals more about imagination than geography. It reflects a longing for stability, for continuity, for a slower pace of existence. Across cultures, stories of lost lands often carry a similar structure. They describe balance, followed by gradual change, not always catastrophe. Lemuria belongs to this category of narrative, a symbolic landscape revisited across generations. Its appeal may lie in its restraint, the absence of drama, the absence of urgency. In an age defined by acceleration, the myth offers an alternative rhythm. Whether historical theory or cultural metaphor, Lemuria endures. Over time, the physical search for Lemuria faded. What remained was the idea itself. an imagined continent, positioned between memory and speculation. Its geography was uncertain, its timeline undefined, yet its tone remained steady. Descriptions continued to emphasize calm landscapes, stable climates, gradual movement. No definitive map exists. No confirmed artifact has been found, and yet, the narrative persists. Perhaps its endurance is less about proof and more about atmosphere. In its restraint, the legend avoids excess. It does not rely on spectacle. Instead, it offers continuity, a world imagined. And in that stability, the story rests, not resolved, simply concluded. In reviewing the legend, one notices its restraint. There are no elaborate chronicles, no recorded battles. Instead, there is emphasis on duration, on steady existence, unmarked by disruption. The myth presents a civilization that simply endured without urgency, without spectacle. This consistency is unusual among lost continent narratives. It avoids dramatic endings. The disappearance of Lemuria is portrayed as gradual, a long transition, rather than an event. Generations are imagined as witnessing slow change, water levels rising, land diminishing without sudden alarm. Over extended time, the continent fades, not violently, simply progressively. Evintra, the land, is remembered more than observed. In this way, Lemuria transforms from location to concept. A symbol of balance, a representation of measured rhythm. Today, Lemuria exists only in discussion, in text, in interpretation. There is no continent to locate, no shoreline to measure, only the enduring image of a quiet world. Unlike myths centered on catastrophe, the Lemurian story emphasizes continuity. Whether viewed as discarded theory or symbolic narrative, its tone remains unchanged. What remains is not a location, but an idea, a symbol of balance lost to time. The legend does not insist. It does not persuade. It simply rests. This interpretation reflects the tone of the broader legend, even disappearance. In that restraint, it mirrors the very qualities, a steady landscape, a balanced society, a gradual transformation. And now, like the continent itself, this account settled, not ending abruptly, but concluding quietly. The idea remains. undisturbed by time. And the image of Lemuria returns to stillness, resting as it always has beneath calm waters.